Hello, hello, hello. If you're watching this, you missed our Monday lecture in computer science principles on the importance of lists in programming languages. We're talking about arrays. We're talking about how to use them and what the utility behind them is. Very exciting stuff. I hope you guys had a nice break and I wish you a happy new year. Let's get started. So our objectives are you can identify an arrays as a data structure to store a list of information, create arrays and access information using an index, manipulate them to append, insert, and remove things from them, and account for the fact that JavaScript arrays are zero indexed. And we'll talk about what that means in a moment. So without further ado, let's get to it. On a daily basis, we all use lists at some point. Maybe a list of phone numbers, we call that a phone book. Maybe a grocery list, maybe a planner where you write down your homework, that's a list. Anything like that where you list a bunch of information and then maybe cross it out or do something with it is a list. And those are really, really useful. In computer science, we also use a lot of lists, and they're very powerful. So here is an overview of Unit 5. We're going to spend some time talking about lists, then we're going to talk about loops, and then we're going to put the two together to traverse through the lists using loops. And that's going to be a big topic. Lastly, there will be a project at the end, and depending where we are left off at the end of the semester, we will decide where to stop. I'm not quite sure yet. Now, real quick, looking back at the Decision Maker app, I want to highlight a discrepancy I saw in many of your papers with the first prompt. So the first prompt asked you for four things. It asked you to tell me what is the purpose of your program, what is the function, the inputs, and the outputs. You don't have to write a lot to get full credit on this. And in fact, on the AP exam, you don't even have to have both functionality and purpose. You just have to have one of the two. So it's pretty easy to score well. But I still want you guys to understand the difference between purpose and functionality for later on in life. That's an important thing to distinguish. So at any rate, what are we looking at here? This is a sample response. It has 3 of the 4 pieces. This is what a lot of you gave me. I was a little bit harsh on this. If you made this mistake, I took off, I believe, 3 points. Please go back and earn those points back. All you need to do is fix this response, resubmit, and I'll give you your points back. But you need to do it. I'm not going to do it for you. So the purpose of my program is to recommend the best type of bread to the user. That's purpose. I accomplish this by collecting the user's information from 3 drop-down menus, learning about their age, favorite food, and current time of year. That's inputs. The program then outputs a response to the text box with a suggested bread type. That's output. So that's 3 of the 4 pieces. Now, how can this be elevated? Well, if you want this response to really pop, you just need to add one more sentence in the center. And that's the how, the functionality. The program processes the information through the use of a series of conditional statements that are housed inside a function which is called anytime an input field is updated. Notice how that was very succinct. You didn't need to write a huge paragraph, but it told you every single little piece you wanted to know about how the program works in broad strokes. It didn't go into huge amounts of detail, but you probably have a pretty good picture in your head of how I structured this, right? You should do the same thing. Please, please, please consider having this kind of structure where you have a purpose, inputs, functionality, and outputs. You don't have to put them in an order or anything like that, or even have a separate sentence for each. That's not necessary, but you do need to address all 4 of these pieces. All right, without further ado, let's forge on ahead to loops. So this activity involves you using some manipulatives. Normally I'd give you a bunch of bags and some sticky notes, but since that's not an option at the moment, I have a manipulative for you right here underneath Modules on Lime CPS inside your assignment 050101, which is due January 6th, that's Wednesday. It is worth 15 points. Let's take a look at it. So there's all kinds of stuff here that you can copy and paste to simulate lists. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But what are we talking about here with lists? Here's the importance of this concept. If you have a variable, let's say I have a variable, I call it my name. I can only store one piece of information in there, which is fine, and we've been getting along okay doing that. But what happens when I want to store, let's say, the names of everyone in the class? Am I going to write out 38 different variables? No, that's a lot of work. What about phone numbers? If I want to have a phone book, am I going to have a separate variable for each phone number? No, that's crazy. We need something else. We need a data collection option that's more dynamic, not something that's static like this, where we have to assign the name to the variable name, we have to explicitly declare each separate variable. So what do we do instead if we needed to store 1,000 pieces of information? We are going to create a list. So here's how you do it. If you wanted to simulate it using bags, you would take a large bag and name it whatever your list would be. So a list is going to be a list of all the lunch foods. So I'll call it lunch food. Inside that bag, you can put smaller bags. Think of each smaller bag as if it was a variable. However, these variables are not really variables. They don't have a name. Instead, they have an index starting at 0 and going all the way up to however many you want to have. And then at each index, we're going to store a value. So nachos is stored in index 0. At index 1, we've stored pizza. And at index 2, we've stored soup. Something to consider is the naming conventions still apply. So lunch food has to be one word, no spaces. You can't start it with a number. And please use camel case. So this is what it would look like in real life. Here are my elements of my array. That's what this is. And these are the indices, starting at 0 and counting up. Notice that the length of this array is 3. The length is always one more than the last index number, since we started counting at 0. Here's the syntax for declaring these in your program. You would say var mylist. You can call it whatever you want. Any legal series of words here will do. Equals, and then in order to let your computer know this is going to be an array, you put square brackets. And then you can use commas to separate different entries inside your array, inside this declaration. So my list, at 0 we store pizza, at 1 we store 4, and yada yada yada. We can then work with this. So let's say we wanted to dereference, that's the technical fancy term for what we're doing here, my list at index 1. So the syntax is as follows. You write the name of your list, then bracket, whatever index you want to reference, and then close bracket. So in this case, this would literally evaluate to pizza. If you were to do the same thing with lunch food at 0, you'd get nachos, and at 2, you'd get soup. You can do regular math using this kind of stuff. So 3 plus my numbers at 1, well, my numbers at 1 is just 20. So it's the same thing as writing 3 plus 20 as far as the computer is concerned. So you would end up with 23. And then, of course, you could do 2 of these added together. Again, the computer doesn't care, just evaluates them individually. This evaluates to 10. This evaluates to 25. 10 plus 25 is 35. Now, as an aside, be very careful. You can add elements you've dereferenced inside your array. That's totally fine. You can multiply them, subtract them. Anything you can do with a regular number, you can do with this. However, do not add 2 arrays together. This is not a well-defined procedure inside of JavaScript, as in it does not make any sense. If I was to do this, you would expect the solution to either be an array of 4 elements with them appended together, so 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe you'd expect something like 2 plus 4 give you 6, 3 plus 5, which would give you 8. The answer is neither of those. The answer is crazy. 2, 34, 5. These 2 are appended together, but these 2 are not. So this is crazy, insane Java nonsense, JavaScript nonsense, I should say. And There's no reason for why it should be this way. It doesn't make any sense. So just be aware that this is not supported. Please don't try to do this. Alrighty, back to things that are supported. You can assign things to your indices inside your array after it's been created. So if we start with 10, 20, 25, but then later on we say, okay, make my numbers at 0 be 5, well, we'll just replace 10 with 5. And then if we do the same thing, but at bucket 2 we want 30, well, we'll get that 30 that we want. It works exactly how you would think. So there's some puzzles there for you to figure out. This is a solution to the first one. So my stuff cat at 1 is what's stored at index 1. Then we do at index 2, we want to store whatever is in 1, so that's also cat. At 0, we want to do 3 plus 10. So my stuff at 3 is 5, plus 10 is 15. And last but not least, at index 3, we're going to do my stuff at 0 plus my stuff at 0, which is just 15 times 2, or 30. All right, you can also use these other operands to change your lists. I will go over these again next class, but in case you are working ahead, in order to remove an item, simply say remove item. Inside here, specify the name of your list and what index you'd like to be removed. If you remove an item from the center of your list, everything else gets scooched over to fill in the gap. Similarly, appending an item adds an item to the end of your list, and inserting an item inserts an item into whatever slot you would like and moves everything else over. So those are the basic operations of arrays, and we're going to continue exploring these in more detail in following classes. So I'm looking forward to that. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Happy New Year.